Well, hey and welcome back. This is one of those projects that felt like it never was going to end for me. I'm sure you've had one of those before, just those projects where everything sort of seems to go wrong. I mean, in principle, it seems pretty straightforward. These days I'm doing a fair amount of woodwork at home, and one thing I'm really lacking is a proper woodworking vise. You know, relying on clamps doesn't work in every situation, and the metal vise really just doesn't work all that well for wood. Now, to be honest, the original plan was to go to the hardware store and buy one of those wood vises that you can find for like $100. Quick, easy, simple, and I had a bunch of wood projects that I had to do. But just seeing them in store and looking at some of the reviews, I wasn't too impressed with the overall design and build of the vises that they had. And at that point, I did what any other self-respecting sort of person would do. I left Bunnings, but not before buying a bunch of other stuff, including potting mix, a bunch of seedling trays, some internet cable. I don't know how this happens, it happens every single time that I go. So seemingly, I walked away with everything that I needed, except a vise. So I guess let's go ahead and try and make one ourselves. Now, in designing my own vise, the one thing that I did want that I couldn't find in an off-the-shelf form, or at least off-the-shelf for a reasonable price, would be one of those dual lead screw vises. Essentially, you have two screws at each end, which leaves a whole bunch of space in the middle, which allows you to put stuff through the middle of the vise and clamp it. I've never used one, but I like the design and I think it should be a lot better, at least for large pieces of wood, because you can clamp stuff a lot more evenly. Compare this to a regular vise where you have to choose either side of the vise to clamp it. Now, in terms of actual design, I wasn't really approaching this with a proper design in mind. Mostly because it wasn't really high on my priority list, and I thought it would be a lot more simpler to do, and because I thought I could throw it together in a few days and be done with it. But as it turns out, I probably should have had a design to begin with. Now, the basic frame of the vise is going to be built around these pieces of steel flat bar. Not really my material of choice, I would have wanted it to be a little bit thicker, but really it's a vise, it's a wood vise that I'll use every now and then. I really just wanted to use up this steel flat bar that I've had lying around and really isn't doing a whole lot. Now, in terms of the lead screws, I am choosing to join them through a set of gears. I know there are some designs that leave them independent, and there are some other designs that allow you to engage and disengage the gears, but really I'm not trying to overthink things here. I just want two lead screws that will screw in and out at the same rate when I turn the handle. And because I don't have a set of 5 gears laying about, I am going to have to make my own. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll get a bunch of plate cut off and cut into the rough shape. With them now cut up, I'll now drill and ream a centre hole. So with that now done, I now turn down an arbor on the lathe so I can then mount the blanks and then clean them up. Alright, and those are the blanks now done. I'll now turn down the arbor so all the gears can fit on it at once. Now over at the milling machine, I'll get the dividing head put on, and I'll use a drill to drill through 2 gears. This will be so I can then pin them to the lead screw. And with the holes now drilled, we can now get the arbor into the dividing head. Now I'll be using the dividing head to cut 5 60 teeth gears. Now there's no real rhyme for this exact number, just that the stock fits on the flat bar that I'm using, and it should give me a distance between the 2 lead screws of about 230mm, which is a good amount of space. So once the plates have been swapped out, it should be good to go. And just to make sure I haven't stuffed up, once I'm at the beginning, I'll do the first tooth again. If I've done everything correctly, it shouldn't be cutting. And thankfully, it isn't here. That's the industry standard gear test. As you can see, they're gears. Now the next thing we need to figure out is the lead screws. And this was the first major stumbling block of the project. The original plan was to use some sort of Acme trapezoidal thread. They're just more suited to this style of application than your regular 60-degree V-thread. And originally, that is what I ended up doing. In fact, it was pretty much a custom trapezoidal left-hand thread. Or I guess, a reverse thread. And the reason for that was, originally, there was an extra gear at the bottom. It would connect to that center gear, and the reason for it was, it would allow you to see the 5 gears in action pretty much unobscured. And I really liked the design on paper, but once I started to actually make it, it became very obvious that I was going to have some problems assembling it. There's going to be a lot more welding involved, it would be a lot more difficult to make the vise more rigid than it already was, and to top it off, the cast iron that I was using to make the nuts really was not up to standard, as I demonstrated a few weeks ago. So faced with all these problems, I simply abandoned it and in favour of a regular M16 thread. In a perfect world this may have ended up a bit different, but given that I have a bit of woodworking that I need to do, I did want to get this project done and I needed to move it on. So this stuff here is eventually what I settled on. Although for reasons of poor continuity, you are going to see the old lead screw in a lot of shots until the very end. Again, another reason why I should have done this in CAD beforehand. So the next thing we'll figure out is the fixed and moving jaw pieces of the vise. The fixed jaw will bolt directly onto the bench, and the moving jaw moves backwards and forwards and it has the gear train bolted to it. So the first thing I'll do is I'll get it cut down and then cleaned up. So with the two pieces of steel now cleaned up, I'll now start to drill and tap some holes. The three in the center will be drilled and tapped for some studs, and this will be for the gears to ride on. The two holes at each end will be drilled and reamed, and these will be the guides for the lead screws. With the moving jaw now done, I'll now drill two big holes in the fixed jaw. This will be for the lead screw nuts. Now the holes need to be quite big, so I'll start off with an annular cutter to remove the bulk of the material, and then I'll take it to its final size using the boring head. And that's roughly how it's going to go together, although it is using a different lead screw at the moment. Now frankly, I'm really happy with the amount of space that gearing has given us. That is at least 230mm. But in terms of how the gears actually look, I am a bit disappointed. I mean, they'll work just fine, but I think the gear teeth themselves are just a little bit too small. They just blend in a little bit. Of course, I am comparing it to some other designs that use much larger module gears, and I do think they look a little bit better, but frankly, I don't have any larger gear cutters than this, and for what it's worth, these will work just as good as any other gears. The next thing that I'll make are the studs that the gears are going to ride on. And making these was very straightforward, using some tool steel, which I'll then heat treat and harden. And those are the 3 studs now made, although they still need to be heat treated. Now the silver steel that I'm using is a water quenching steel, so I'll quench them in water and then I'll pop them in the oven at about 200 degrees for a little bit, just to temper them and make them not so brittle. and once they're screwed in, they'll look something like that. They will need a bit of oil to prevent galling, but outside of that, they should work just fine. Most importantly though, the gears are able to freely rotate. The next thing that I'll do is drill and countersink 4 holes in each of the plates. This will be for screwing the wooden soft jaws onto the vise. With that now done, I now need to attach a bottom plate onto the fixed jaw so I can screw the fixed jaw onto the wooden bench. Now the material should have been a little bit deeper. This stuff here is just a little bit too small, but in the end it won't matter and you'll see why in the end. Now initially the plan was to weld it, but as it turns out, I am out of welding gas. So instead, I'll just bolt it on. It's not perfect, but bolting it is going to be more than capable. Now the next thing that I need to do is attach a handle to the middle gear. This is so I can spin it, the other gears, and the lead screws. Again, this is sort of one of those I'll figure it out sort of later stage designs, and eventually I came to the conclusion that the best design that I could do was weld a piece of tube to the end of one gear and then drill a hole all the way through it. And to weld it, for the first time in 4 years, I'm going to try using flux core. You know, before using it, I was wondering why I never bother using flux core because I don't need to use welding gas. And after welding it, I remembered why I don't use flux core. It took about half an hour to get rid of all that smoke. The important thing though is that metal was melted and metal now sticks. Now as for the handle, I have the old drawbar for the milling machine and it's not doing anything, so I'm simply going to cut it down and use that as the handle. Or at least the basis of the handle. All it really needs is a cap for the other end so the handle doesn't simply fall out. Alright, and with that now done, it's definitely feeling like a vise. With that said though, it is missing quite a few things. And the first thing that it really needs is its proper lead screw. So I'll get it cut and the end turned down in the lathe. In a spare piece of steel, I'll then turn down a flanged bushing. Then using the press, I'll press it onto the lead screw. Now the reason for it is it pushes up against the back of the moving jaw and constrains the lead screw. So when the lead screw is pushing outwards, it pushes the moving jaw outwards as well. With a new lead screw, I also need some new lead screw nuts. These are some off-the-shelf nuts which I'll modify to work with the existing holes. Now these won't be as good as the cast iron ones or ones made from bearing bronze, but I have seen other people use this exact setup, and as long as you keep them lightly oiled, they should hold up just fine. And now that they fit, they can now be welded in place. Now the next thing that I need to do is add a bit of rigidity to the moving jaw. It's only half an inch thick, and that really is not enough to resist bending when I tighten the vise on the parts. I'm sure it's not going to be the end of the world, but a bit more bracing is going to help it. So I'm going to drill and tap a whole bunch of holes through the top and the bottom. I'll then get two pieces of 5mm flat bar and then drill and countersink some holes in that. I'll then screw them in, and hopefully that should make the whole moving jaw a bit more rigid. Now the two pieces of flat bar already have a protective coating of black oxide, which should be good enough for the moment. The moving jaw and the gears are bare steel, and they are susceptible to rusting. Now I could keep them oiled all the time, and that should do enough to prevent them rusting, but instead what I'm going to do is give them a quick electro coat of nickel plating. So in a small tub, I'll pour in a solution of nickel acetate. Now the parts that we want to connect are connected to the anode, and we'll connect a piece of nickel to the cathode. Now because what I'm aiming for is a very thin protective coating of nickel plating, I'll simply move the cathode all over the steel and let it plate. This isn't the best way to do it, but if you need a very quick protective layer of nickel plating, this works just fine. And then to finish it off, I'll then rinse off the nickel acetate in a solution of bicarb soda and water. And I think that turned out looking pretty good. The next thing that I need to make are the wooden soft jaws. And in doing some research, I found out that there are pretty much two ways that you can approach it. You can use a softwood or a hardwood. The general consensus that I've found is that if you use a softwood, it'll be a lot more gentle on parts, but it won't last as long. And the opposite is true for a hardwood. It lasts longer, but maybe not be as gentle on parts. And looking at them both, I don't think there is one that is clear-cut better than the other, but considering that most of what I use is pine, and I always have a lot of pine left over, I'll simply use pine, and hopefully it shouldn't be too hard on the pieces of pine that I'll be working on. The final thing left to do is just make a plastic guard to go in front of the gears. Those gears are definitely a pinch point, and it would be pretty silly not to cover them. I have some plexiglass on hand, so I should be able to fashion up some sort of cover to go on top of the gears. It'll bolt to a bunch of standoffs, and those standoffs will in turn be screwed into the moving jaw. Alright, you now join me in my garage, and this is the workbench that I'm going to mount it to. The first thing I need to do is cut out a section for that bracket bit at the back. Now I am removing a fair amount of wood, so if needs be, I can always add another piece at the back. I'll then drill 2 extra holes, and this will be for bolting the back of the fixture onto the workbench. We'll then get the workbench mounted and then screwed in. Alright, and that is the vise now finally done. For sure, it is definitely a long way away from the original design, and this design is certainly far from being the best. But as far as I'm concerned, I now have a proper wood vise that I can use for holding large pieces of wood. And having now used it, I can tell you that being able to clamp a long piece of wood down the centre and clamp it evenly is definitely worth getting a vise that can do it. Now if I was going to do this again, there is a lot here that I would change and probably simplify even further, but I am happy with how it turned out, and considering that I probably was thinking of abandoning this project and just restarting about halfway through, I'm happy that it got done, and I'm happy that it looks as good as it does. And that's about it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, thank you very much for watching, and I'm sure you'll see this pop up every now and then when I do woodworking. And until then, I'll see you next week.